So we are moving on in our series Apologetics 101, a guide to knowing why you believe. Last week we gave an apologetic for apologetics. Remember, apologetics means a defense from 1 Peter 3:15. 1 Peter 3:15. And so tonight we are going to talk about why I believe in God. The next week it'll be in truth, so on and so forth. So let's just dive right in. Why I believe in God. There's a quote here from Galileo, and the reason I have Galileo's quote up here, and just for those that are tuning in, you might have to go back and watch this again. I hope you go back and watch it again. That would be a good thing, because there's going to be a lot of quotes, and some of them are pretty long. I've kind of broken a cardinal rule of PowerPoint. You're supposed to make it short and precise. And I want to thank Amy, our administrative assistant here at Abbott's Creek. She did a fantastic job taking my wordy notes and the presentation I had and reducing it down so it would fit on these beautiful slides. So thank you, Amy. But you're just going to have to go back and watch it again so that you can get the full weight of these quotes. But I have this quote at the beginning from Galileo, because a lot of times when we are talking about God and God's existence, what happens is there's a setup between science and religion, or between faith and reason. And Galileo is often used as a champion of science and reason. Well, the reality is that Galileo was a Christian. And the individuals at the time of Galileo, the church and the scientific community were one in the same. And Galileo was condemned because his scientific theories went against what the current scientific theories were, not necessarily what the church thought. But Galileo was a Christian, and so I have this quote from Galileo up on the screen. I do not feel obliged to believe that the same God who endowed us with sense, reason, and intellect had intended for us to forego their use. So what's Galileo saying? He's saying that God gave us a brain and he expects us to use it. All right, God is the ultimate mind, and he expects us to use our minds. And we saw all that last week from Matthew 22. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. So when we talk about a belief in God, before I dive into this, and we're just going to cover this slide very briefly, and you see the question at the top, is belief in God rational? And that's the purpose for this lesson in our series. Is belief in God rational? We want to demonstrate that belief in God is indeed rational, or why believe that God exists. So let me just say a couple things. First of all, belief in God for salvation and a relationship does not require you to understand or be familiar with what we're going to talk about here tonight. So everybody take a deep breath wherever you're at, in your homes or in your rooms, wherever you're watching this, because you may think, if I have to know all of that to know who God is and have a relation with him, I'm in big trouble. So, no. Belief in God for salvation does not require this. Genesis 1:1. The Bible just begins with the reality that God exists. In the beginning, God. It doesn't argue for his existence. It doesn't try and prove his existence. It just takes God as a given. All right? In reality, the belief that God exists, or a God exists, is the majority opinion of all human beings who have ever lived in the entire history of planet Earth. All right? If you throw a stone, you're more likely than not to hit someone who believes that God or a higher power exists. All right? This is the default position of people. And I think that's a clue to something a little deeper, but I just want to make that point. So while you don't need to be familiar with or be knowledgeable in these things we're going to talk about in order to be a Christian, in order to believe in God, evangelism and cultural engagement often requires to be familiar with reasons that God exists. You see the difference? Belief in God and belief that God are two different things. Right? I have a relationship with my wife, Charlotte. There is an in relationship. We are in the relationship of marriage. That's different than believing that Charlotte Martin existed before we were married. Or I can say I believe that so-and-so exists, but that doesn't mean I have a relationship with them. So we have to keep that distinct, and I think that will help you out. All right, so 1 Peter 3:15 was our key text, and I want to read it for you tonight. Once again, this is where we get our word apologetics before we dive in to our question tonight. But in your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense, an apologia, to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect. That's key, to do it with gentleness and respect. There's a lot of things I could say at the beginning, and I just don't want to go on too long with these things at the beginning because I want to get to the meat of our topic. But when we discuss these things, we're not trying to win an argument. We're trying to help someone who might have questions clear away those questions so they can see their need for Jesus. That's what we're trying to do. That's my goal as an apologist. That should be your goal as an apologist. Not to win an argument or show that you're smart, but to help someone clear away some barriers so they can see who Jesus is. And if we don't do it with gentleness and respect, it's very difficult to gain a hearing. All right, so this whole question of is belief in God rational? There are two, I guess you would say, negative or critical responses to this question, both saying it's not rational. Number one is the strong critical response, and that's just scientifically driven, and that's basically the view that is based on the false conflict between science and religion. It's basically saying that science has demonstrated that belief in God is irrational. There it is. You run into that a lot, even though it's not said that directly. And then the second criticism of the idea of belief in God being rational is what I call moderate. And that just is basically saying that faith doesn't have anything to do with certain knowledge of things. And we hit on this in last week's study about how we define faith. So faith is seen as a very emotional or subjective thing, and only emotional or subjective. And therefore, to talk about God and belief in God or belief in the existence of God in terms of reason or rationality doesn't make sense. So those are kind of two negative responses you might get from people inside the church or outside the church when you even ask the question, is belief in God rational? Some people, Christians in particular, might say that God is beyond reason, or God is beyond logic. And they use that to say we shouldn't talk about these things. All right, so what we're going to do in our time tonight is I'm going to give you two types of pointers that point to the conclusion that belief in God makes sense. It's reasonable and it's rational. So you notice I use the term pointer, not proof or argument. I've kind of evolved in my thinking on this a little bit as I've studied this subject, but we're going to stick with the term pointer as we discuss these things. All right, so there are two types of pointers. There's what is called the cosmological scientific pointer or the philosophical psychological pointer. These are two big classes of pointers. Don't let big terms, if these are big terms to you, don't let them confuse you, don't let them bother you, because I hopefully will clear it up so at the end of our time you'll have at least a somewhat clear grasp of what we are talking about. Now, when we talk about pointers, and here's a warning from C.S. Lewis, my favorite author, has been very influential. His writings on my own Christian faith and the way I think about following Jesus. Again, this might be one of those quotes you have to go back and watch later on, but let me read it to you. It comes from his book, The Great Divorce. And there's one individual, one character in the book talking to another. And here's what he says. There have been men before who got so interested in proving the existence of God that they came to care nothing for God himself. As if the good Lord had nothing to do but to exist. There have been some who were so preoccupied with spreading Christianity that they never gave a thought to Christ. That's a warning from C.S. Lewis. There are no silver bullet, undeniable arguments. We can't prove God exists in the same way you might in a scientific experiment. And they should all be taken cumulatively. You got to add them all up. And when we add them all up, they point in a certain direction. Some of these are going to be more convincing to you than others, depending upon your personality type, depending upon your interest, depending upon your background. They are not intended to demonstrate the existence of the God of the Christian faith, so we're not going to arrive there. They're just intended to demonstrate that you're within reason to believe God exists. It's not like believing in Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny or make-believe. To believe in a super being who exists outside of space, time, and matter is a reasonable conclusion when you look at all of the pointers. But we have to bear C.S. Lewis' warning in mind so that we don't think we can prove this without a doubt to someone, that there's a silver bullet. If someone would just understand this argument, then the lights would come on. Because we're dealing with individual human beings. And if you're watching this and you have questions about God's existence, you're a human being, an individual human being with a personality and a makeup, and this might not make a dent in you, but hang with me, because I hope by the end of our series on Apologetics 101, there'll be something we say that puts a little dent in your skepticism. So, let's talk about the cosmological pointers. All right, cosmological or scientific pointers. That's what we're talking about, science. And these are pointers that come from the universe itself, all the physical world that exists itself. So we have the beginning pointer, and this is the Kalam cosmological argument. And here it is, okay? Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. Now, what is the statement that we have to demonstrate when we're looking at this pointer? Well, it's this. The universe began to exist. Well, how do you know? Were you there, Josh? No, I wasn't there. And nobody else was either. Except God was there. I'm kind of tipping my hand, aren't I? But for eons, most people believe the universe was eternal. It just always existed. As a matter of fact, most Christian philosophers and theologians throughout history believed the universe was eternal. And God's existence doesn't depend or rise or fall whether the universe is eternal or not. But when we look at this clue, this pointer, if the universe began to exist, and whatever begins to exist has a cause, the universe needs a cause. So let's talk about, how do we know the universe began to exist? Is there any evidence to support that statement? Well, yes, there is. You have the second law of thermodynamics, you have expansion of the universe, you have what's called the radiation echo, and you have, this is a big one at the bottom, your head's going to spin off. It's probably going to pop off right now. Their head's popping off all over on Facebook right now. The impossibility of an infinite regress in time. What? It's like a foreign language, okay? I know, hang with me. So these are scientific pointers. Okay, so the second law of thermodynamics. This is the universe is running out of usable energy and moving towards disorder. Well, how does that demonstrate the universe had a beginning? Well, if the universe has a limited amount of energy, then that means there was a time when it had more energy than it does now, and so there must have been a time when it had all the energy that it had, and now it's losing energy. It's like you're driving a car, you fill your gas tank up, and the gauge goes down, right? And then you get the warning light that tells you if you don't put fuel in this car, you are going to stop. But there was a time when you had more fuel in the car. If you had an eternal gas tank, you would never have to put fuel in it. It would never run out of fuel, but it runs out of fuel. And the universe is running out of fuel. It's running out of usable energy. Then you have this thing called the expansion of the universe. This was discovered by Edwin Hubble in 1927. He observed that the universe is moving in an outward trajectory from a single point, meaning that he observed in 1927 that the universe was moving out like this, so that if you were to put it on rewind, it would go back and collapse to a single point, which shows there was a time where there was a single point and then it's moving outward. Then you have this thing called the radiation echo. This is 1965. Two scientists, Penzazias and Wilson, they detected a radiation echo in space at Bell's Laboratory in Holmdel, New Jersey. And they concluded this is the initial afterglow, or the afterglow of the initial beginning of the universe. And then this bottom one, I'm just going to go through it. And if you have any questions about this, you can ask me those questions either on Facebook or in person, or reach out to me. I can't promise you I will be able to answer those questions to any satisfaction. But let me just go through this. This bottom one. An infinite number of days has no end. But today is the end day of history. History being a collection of days. Therefore, there were not an infinite number of days before today. Now, what does that mean? It means if the days were infinite, we would not be here today, because the day is a stopping point of history. And that means it's not infinite. So the universe has a beginning, and this is kind of a given factor now. So that's a lot, but there's my second favorite author, G.K. Chesterton. Two British guys. Actually, C.S. Lewis was Irish, but here's what he says. It is absurd for the evolutionists to complain that it is unthinkable for an admittedly unthinkable God to make everything out of nothing, and then pretend that it is more thinkable that nothing should turn itself into everything. So when we talk about this cosmological pointer, basically what we're saying is either God is the brute fact or the universe is. If the universe is, then the universe made itself, and something can't make itself. All right? So that's the first pointer when we look at these scientific pointers. The second pointer is the design argument. Every design has a designer. The universe has highly complex design. Therefore, the universe has a designer. Okay? How do we know that? How do you know the universe has complex design? Well, there's a lot of reasons. There's what's called the anthropic principle. This is that there are 122 specific conditions that are finely tuned that must exist on Earth for life to exist. And the way it was shared with me was, imagine you have a control panel with all of these dials. And each dial has to be set to a specific number or measurement in order for the machine to work. And if you even slightly, if you just in an incremental way adjust even one dial, the whole machine breaks down and blows up. And that's what the universe is like. For life to exist, there are 122 specific little dials that have to be finely tuned, or the whole machine blows up. It doesn't work. All right? The probability of that happening by chance, of 122 specific dials happening by chance, because that's the only alternative if it's not God, on any planet is 1 out of 10 to 138th power, or 1 with 138 zeros behind it. Now, how big of a number is that? The total number of atoms in the universe is 10 to the 70th power. So the chances of 100, these finely tuned conditions arising by chance is greater than the total number of atoms in the entire universe. And this should cause, for Christians, this should cause us to worship. That's what God did. And this God that fine-tuned this universe so you could be here knows the number of the hairs on your head and catches your tears in a bottle. Who said apologetics isn't meant to worship? I'll tell you right now, I get excited about this stuff. Here's another way we know the universe has complex design. This guy, Donald Page. The odds of the universe randomly forming in a manner suitable for life. This is another just, you look at all these odds. It's like the statistical probabilities, and I'm not a math guy. That was my weakest subjects in school, math and science. My best subjects were history and literature. But I even know that's a big number. And if I was a betting man, I wouldn't bet on those odds. Well, if there is no God, the alternative is you got to bet on these odds. It's like the universe hit the most amazing lottery ticket ever. All right, another way, a reason specified in complex life. Now this one is amazing. An amoeba, so a single-cell organism, has the equivalency of 1,000 volumes of information in its DNA. So, one single-cell organism has the equivalent of 1,000 volumes of information in its DNA. Question. If I had one simple book, let's say a Dr. Seuss book, and I said to you, I walked into this room, or I walked in this printing press after a tornado hit the printing press, and there was this Dr. Seuss book, fully formed, color, pages, everything, right there. The tornado hit it and caused it. What would you say to me? You say, Josh, I need to take you to see a specialist. Okay? But yet, there are individuals who would say that an amoeba, the 1,000 volumes of information in its DNA happened by a tornado, basically. Chains. Now, let's not stop at the amoeba. What about the human brain? You see this? 20 million books. Your brain. Now, working with young people, I would have a smart remark right now. I would say some of those young people didn't get the full 20 million volumes. Some were a million or two shy. But 20 million books, the equivalent of 20 million books of information in the human brain, that is amazing. It is amazing. This gentleman, Carl Sagan, he was famous for the phrase, the universe is, all there was, and all there ever will be. This is a big quote, one of those quotes you're going to have to go back and look. I'm going to read it to you. The information content of the human brain expressed in bits is probably comparable to the total number of connections among neurons, about 100 trillion bits. If written out in English, the information in the human brain, if written out in English, say that information will fill some 20 million volumes, as many as in the world's largest libraries. The equivalent of 20 million books is inside the heads of every one of us. The brain is a very big place and a very small space. Here's the tragedy. Carl Sagan was an atheist. He believed that those 20 million volumes happened by a tornado hitting a printing press. And that's tragic in more ways than one. So those are the cosmological or the scientific pointers. Now we're going to move quickly to the philosophical or psychological pointers. So maybe you're like me, and the scientific things just don't get your blood flowing. And to be honest, they don't get my blood flowing. I've never been overly excited, except with the worship part. This is what God does. But in terms of helping me establishing in my soul reasons for God, they're powerful, but they just don't appeal to me, Josh Jacobs. These next ones do. What I call psychological or philosophical pointers. And we're just going to go through them quickly. The first one is the argument from desire. You're just going to have to follow with me here. Every natural or innate desire in man points to a corresponding real object that can satisfy that desire. Meaning, man has a desire for food. There's an object known as food that fulfills that desire. That's what is being said here. There exists in man a desire which nothing in time, nothing on earth, no creature can satisfy. Therefore, there exists something outside of time, earth, and creatures which can satisfy this desire. This is talking about the God-shaped hole in our hearts. This was formulated by C.S. Lewis. Every person deep inside, there's something you long for, and you get little glimpses of it in the world, but then those glimpses go away, and this is what it's speaking to, the argument from desire. And then we have beauty, value, and ultimacy. Beauty, value, and ultimacy. See how much time we have here. Okay. Man lives as if there is real beauty in the world. All right? If man is a mere biological machine, beauty is merely a neural, just matter in motion, then all beauty is, so, well, let me finish the argument and then give you an illustration of what we're trying to say. Man lives as if there is real beauty in the world, and seeing that man lives this way, there are only two possibilities. Man's deluded, or beauty has no real meaning. And nobody lives that way. So there must be a transcendent source of beauty. So here's what I'm saying. Man lives as if there is real beauty in the world. Now maybe there isn't real beauty. And if there isn't real beauty, and all beauty is chemical reaction in my brain. When I look at my wife, Charlotte, and I say to her, "You are beautiful," I am saying the equivalent of a mental burp. It's a chemical reaction. That's very romantic, isn't it? You know, if I say that sunset is beautiful, well, I'm not really, it's just a chemical reaction. And nobody lives that way. When we tell our loved ones they're beautiful, we hear a beautiful piece of music or see a beautiful painting, we mean something real. We do. Value. Man lives as if people and our relations with them have real value. If there is no God, then man doesn't have real value. Man only has the value that the people in power want to give to him. All right? If man is a mere biological machine, people and relationships do not have value. People live deluded lives as if there is value. Man lives as if people and our relations with them have real value. So there must be a source of this value, independent of man. The value comes from outside the universe. And then ultimately, man lives as if life has real meaning. If we are just biological machines, matter and motion, then your life does not have ultimate meaning. It doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. C.S. Lewis again. You can't, except in the lowest animal sense, be in love with a girl if you know and keep on remembering that all the beauties of her person and of her character are a momentary and accidental pattern produced by the collision of atoms, and that your own response to them is a sort of psychic phosphorescence arising from the behavior of your genes. Now, Andrea and Andy are sitting here behind the camera, and I'm sure that if Andy wrote this right here, he wrote a poem or some nice love letter to Andrea, and he said, "When I look at you, it's just a momentary and accidental pattern produced by the collision of my atoms, and that my response to you is just a sort of psychic phosphorescence arising from my genes," she would be blown away. I don't know why we don't put that in love songs, right? But you can't go on getting very serious pleasure from music if you know and remember that its air significance is a pure illusion. That you like it only because your nervous system is irrationally conditioned to like it. What we're saying is that beauty, value, ultimacy, these are pointers that there is something more than just this physical existence. Here's another quote. I don't have time, we're out of time, but basically Stephen Jay Gould is saying that we're here because of an accident. I don't mean to be crude, but sometimes you have to kind of be straight to the point to get this across. What Stephen Jay Gould, who is now deceased, is saying is that all of human life and all of the beauty we see and all of the richness of our relationships are a cosmic, you blow your nose on a tissue. That's it. That's it. Human beings are related to bananas, which are related to amoeba, which are related to trees. If there is know God. I think these are pointers. Conclusion. Either there is a transcendent source of beauty, value, and ultimacy, and living as though they are realities is reasonable, or there is a transcendent source of beauty, value, and ultimacy, and living as though they are realities is self-delusional. Either there is some source for these things, and living as if they exist is reasonable, or there is not a source for these things, and we're all deluded just to get through the day. The choice is up to us. In the end, is it reasonable to believe in God? Is it rational to believe in God? Yes, it is. There are cosmological, scientific pointers. There are psychological, philosophical pointers. I have 2 papers. One is by one guy named Peter Kraft, a philosopher. He has 20 arguments for the existence of God. Another one by Alvin Plantinga. 24 or so arguments for the existence of God. Some of these are convincing. Some of these aren't. I have in my Bible a growing list of reasons why I believe in the existence of God. It started off with morality, relationships, and consciousness, and I've added to it over the last several months. Beauty, rise of the Christian church, geographic spread of Christianity, math, logic, music, and I'll probably keep adding to it. In the end, believing in God is rational. It's not wish fulfillment. And my hope is that what we've talked about tonight, if you have questions or you have concerns or you're struggling with this or you're having conversations with individuals in your life and they're bringing up questions and you don't know how to answer it and all you can give them is say, well, the Bible says, and that doesn't work. I hope that tonight we've offered you, I know it's a lot of information, but we've offered you some tools. Remember, tools for the tool belt that will help you be a more effective witness for the Lord. So God bless you. Again, if you have any questions, you can reach out to us on the Facebook page, comment below on the video, reach out to us here at the church. We'll do our best to help you. But until next time, God bless.